Welcome back to the Learning Curve, the KNOLSKAPE podcast, where we explore how the work, the worker, and the workplace are being reshaped and what leaders need to do about it. On this show, we usually find ourselves circling the same uncomfortable truth, which is that disruption keeps moving faster than the people inside our organizations are being prepared for. In today's episode, we're going to be touching on the subject of psychological flexibility, the capability the leaders cannot afford to skip. And we'll be going into a little bit about what is psychological flexibility, what does it mean in the workplace, how do we do anything about it, and what does that entail and involve. Joining me today is my guest who spent the better part of 2 decades sitting with this related question, which is what do leaders actually need to develop as opposed to what is easy for us to teach them. Dr. Alison Maitland is a Health and Care Professions Council registered psychologist, an executive coach, the co-founder of Becoming International, an organization that designs leadership development drawing on psychology and adult learning theory. She's also the co-author of Drop the Struggle, and her work on vertical development and psychological flexibility has shaped programs at financial institutions, policing bodies, utilities, and across the FTSE as well. Alison, welcome back to the Learning Curve. I know this is your second time joining us, so welcome.
Thank you. And that intro makes me feel quite old, actually, when you talk about decades, Jason. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
No, we're glad to have you. And before we kick off, Alison, you've probably come across this before with us. We like to have a little bit of a rapid fire to help ease ourselves into it and get to the questions. But if you're okay, we can start with a few rapid fire questions. Whatever comes to mind, don't overthink it. And we'll go from there. How's that sound?
Okay, I'm starting to feel a bit nervous now with the rapid fire, but go for it, Jason.
Don't worry. Whatever comes to mind, we'll capture it, and I'm sure there's some interesting answers. So, psychologist first or coach first?
Psychologist first. Yeah, always go to the underpinning, then do the work. Yeah.
Interesting. One book every leader should read that is not a leadership book. I love this question.
Oh, what a great question. So I think I would go with the book 1,000 Splendid Suns, just because it feels to me like a book where the characters in the book have to really lean into challenge, to difficulty, to who they are, to adapt that, to live in the context. To me, it tells me everything about the challenge of being a leader, even though it's absolutely nothing to do with leadership. It's about women's, life in Afghanistan and the challenges of all of that. Yeah.
Nice. I love that. I always love this question. Mine would be a Philip Pullman book, based in Oxfordshire, where I live, and just the whole idea around curiosity, innovation, and this and imagination, and challenging status quo. So I love what you've said there.
You catch me on that one, then it makes me think of the demon that sits on the shoulder. There's a lot of similarities between that.
Exactly that, Alison. Yeah, I love it.
Part of what we might talk about. So interesting.
Yeah. Great connection. And what's the most overrated word in leadership development right now? There's always one.
I'm only going to have one. Which would I pick? Well, we're going to touch on it today, probably. For me, the one I've heard a lot recently is psychological safety. I have a lot of clients talking to us about psychological safety, training people in that, equipping them with that. And we'll talk about it later. That's my one for the moment anyway.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. That is definitely one that I want to cover today and make sure that because there is, people do blur the lines and cross over. So yes, we can get into that a bit later. But back to the quick fire. What about coffee, tea, or something strong before a tough coaching session? I hope it's not the latter, but who knows? It might be.
I'm a green tea girl, so it's got to be a cup of tea. I've got some just in here.
Love it. And finish this sentence. So most leadership programs fail because
we tell people what to do rather than help them to discover who they are and give them the tools to be themselves with skill.
Got it. Nice. I won't get you to name the client, but one word to describe the hardest clients you coach, or the hardest clients to coach, if you like.
Hmm. Yeah, maybe we'll touch on this later too, actually, that they're the ones who can't let go of the control agenda. And it's funny, I was talking to Liz, who I work with this morning, the people who can't imagine that if they could just make space for their feelings and they could just let those thoughts just ramble on, they don't have to listen to everything that their mind says, but they just can't. They just have to hold on tight to that. They're the hardest ones, because trying to find that little in to going, do you know, there could be another way that would open up a lot more flexibility and possibility and choice for you in your job and your life. Yeah.
Got it. Nice. AI in the workplace, friend, foe, or frenemy?
I think I'll go with frenemy.
Okay.
Most definitely frenemy. Can see the upsides, and yeah, the researcher in me goes, oh, really? Please don't give me that answer. But yeah,
We always
lots
get
of upsides to do.
Okay. And final one, if you could put one sentence on a billboard outside every Monday morning leadership meeting, what would it say?
Uh, oh, I wish I had more time to think about that one. What a great thing to do. Yeah, what would it say? I think I'd say, it's a long sentence. You're not what you do. You're not what you own. You're not what people say about you.
Oh, okay. You could unpack that, in a whole conversation itself. Okay, love that. Thanks very much. Really enjoyed that, and hearing some of those. And I know we're going to circle back to some of those and go a bit deeper as we get into the conversation. But I want to just touch on something as we set the scene, which is to give listeners a quick sense of where becoming international sits in the world. I know you have a very particular point of view, which is that leaders do not necessarily need fixing, and you've touched on that. In an era where sort of organizations are running future skills, gap analysis, this can feel slightly contrarian. But walk us through it. What's your thinking behind that, just to set the scene?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, because as the world is changing, will continue to change. There will be skill gaps. So our position is definitely not that there aren't skill gaps, and research out there tells us that look up the Future of Jobs report by the World Economic Forum. It tells you what some of those jobs are: the resilience and collaboration and creativity and things like that.
Yeah.
But for us, it's about if leaders don't have those skills, don't think that they're broken or they need fixing. Could you perhaps think about them, that they actually have the capacity and the capability to stretch in those ways? It's just we haven't taught them how to do it. So that's our kind of nuance on all of that.
Got it. That makes sense. And you've made the case previously around that too much leadership development is about telling people what to do. You mentioned that earlier, and I love the, for those that follow Simon Sinek, point of view on this as well. What's the alternative that you could offer, or we could offer as part of that, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we see a lot of businesses who kind of start from the position that, if the leader doesn't have that skill, that we need to tell them, and then we'll tell them again, and then we'll tell them how to do it again. And, if they haven't got it, we'll tell them how to do it again. Or we'll put them in a room with case studies or that don't kind of fit it. All the very traditional leadership development approaches.
Yeah.
And if they work, Jason, you and I would be out of a job. Frankly, they wouldn't need us. If it was as easy as that, you wouldn't be doing what you do. I wouldn't be doing what I do. But it isn't. And I guess we're sitting from that perspective that people have the potential to do all of those skills, but something gets in the way. And so actually, I guess the work that we do at Becoming is, okay, can we look at what's getting in the way? Can we help them to build that psychological flexibility, that flexibility muscle, if you want to put it like that, so that they can use those skills? So yeah, that's the difference for us.
Got it. And you've touched on it there, but let's get right into the meat of the conversation and start with the term itself, because I know you mentioned another term that can become a bit of a buzzword in some organizations and some arenas. help us understand what sits behind psychological flexibility, and in plain language for those that are listening, what is it and what does it mean?
Okay, I'm not always good at plain language. Liz will tell you that. So if you need it plainer, tell me. But for me, and in fact, in the world of psychology, psychological flexibility is that ability, that capability to remain present, to be in the moment, to be open to our emotions, to not be pulled around by our thoughts, and to be able to adapt our behavior so that it aligns with what's important to us, our personal values, and then to take action even when it feels difficult or uncomfortable. That's, I don't know if that
Right.
is simple enough, but it isn't a simple
It,
concept, but it's got those little moving parts in it.
no, but I think it really helps. And even as you're describing that, Alison, one of the thoughts that comes to mind, and when I was looking into the topic and the subject a bit more in preparation for today, was how does it distinguish from other things out there, or other terminologies like resilience or adaptability, or even what comes to mind is mindfulness and things like that as part of that? How does this sit within all of that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it's not. Uh, there isn't a very distinct separation between some of those things. So if you take adaptability, for example, that's about adapting your behaviors in response to something that's changing or a challenging environment. Maybe if something's novel or there's a new situation.
Mm.
And actually, psychological flexibility is almost like the stuff that sits underneath someone doing adaptability. So you might see it come out as adaptability, and the psychological flexibility is the capability to allow you to be adaptable. So there's some good research. Quite a paper came out quite recently, which was going, okay, they're sort of overlapping concepts, but they are separate enough to be different.
Okay.
Similarly with resilience, resilience again is where you're kind of recovering from adversity or developing coping skills. It's a similar concept, but often almost like turned on its head, because often resilience, we teach people to cope or to suppress or avoid unwanted experiences, where psychological flexibility is going, no, 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 don't. That's wasting a lot of energy. Don't do that. Learn how to make space for all of that, and then get on with the action that you need to do. So they're linked. Mindfulness, you mentioned, mindfulness is a sub process of psychological flexibility. You
Okay.
will be developing mindful skills to equip you to be psychologically flexible. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
a sub process of, yeah, so they're all quite horribly linked up, and it's easy to kind of swap terms. Whereas there's good literature now. I mean, it comes from the basis of acceptance and commitment therapy as an approach. There are
Okay.
something like 1,500 randomized controlled trials now that sit around this notion of psychological flexibility. So there's a good evidence base going, this is what it is, and here's how the other things fit together with it.
You answered one of my next questions that I was curious around, which is where does it stem from? What's the underlying psychology where this sort of has been born out of? And you touched on it there.
Yes, it comes from, I mean, for short, we call it ACT. Its long name is Acceptance and Commitment Therapy Training, which was which is a behavioral approach to psychology, started in the 1980s by a very smart guy, Stephen Hayes, and his kind of
Yeah.
researchers at the time, Kelly Wilson and Kirk Strozel. And as I say, really well evidence, and it focuses on this notion of what's workable for people. So it's a
Yeah.
very interesting approach to helping people develop well-being, to perform, to have a rich, full and varied life. And how can you give them the flexibility to make those choices and take the actions that move them kind of towards them? And so unlike its predecessor, which would be CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, which we're quite familiar with in lots of countries, like in the UK, in the NHS, very well evidenced therapeutic approach. That's much more about reframing and changing thoughts and reducing emotion, whereas ACT goes, do you know what?
Yeah.
It's going to come. So let's learn how to work more effectively and change the relationship with those thoughts and feelings and experiences, and get ourselves present and take some action towards what's important.
Got it. And I was reading with Hayes, I think it was a personal experience that he was having actually around struggling with anxiety and stress and those types of things, and trying to use traditional methods, but actually finding they're making things worse and not better, and how there's got to be an alternative way, which I think this stems from what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. If you've watched his TED talk, it's quite sort of, oh my goodness. And he's done some brilliant research and worked with lots of very smart people over the years to have this applied in lots of different domains. And the good news is, it's something that you can learn and develop. You can
Yeah,
build your capability to do it. You're not born with it.
yeah,
Um, Everyone can increase their capability or their capacity to be psychologically flexible. It doesn't matter whether you're neurodivergent, whatever. We've all got that capacity to make some steps forwards in this space.
yeah. And this is a good segue because you mentioned there it's a capability that can, or a skill that can be learned as part of this, not just something that someone has and nice to have, but actually we can develop it as human beings as part of that. And the reason I wanted to have this conversation on the learning curve specifically is because, as we know, we've touched on, the work is being rewritten under our feet, especially with technology and AI. Roles are being completely redefined, teams are being reshaped, the worker themselves are being asked to do something that's different inside their original job title. The lines are completely blurring. You frame psychological flexibility as a vital capability in today's environment, particularly tied to vertical leadership development. And I wondered whether you can talk to us a bit about that. And for listeners who aren't deep in the L&D world, vertical development is more about expanding how we think and not just what we know. But would love to get your take on, why does flexibility belong in this conversation as part of that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it in some ways it doesn't immediately jump to mind. But if you think about when you're developing leaders vertically, you're trying to get them to have a deeper, more, I don't know, comprehensive, is that the right word?
Yeah,
And a more complex way of making sense and operating in the world. And if we think about our world, it isn't getting simpler, is it? It's just getting more complex. So you need to develop leaders vertically to make sense, to navigate, to get to work through the shifts in how power works, to embrace and make best use of commercially AI, to work in a global environment, to kind of sit across the cultural schisms that we've got in the world. And so if vertical development is about learning how to see the world through those different lenses, it's also about having the flexibility to kind of challenge the interpretations, the meanings, the kind of rules we've given ourselves as leaders about how do I do that kind of thing.
yeah,
And so what psychological flexibility does in the context of vertical development, it just gives us a better understanding of who we are and how we are. And we often talk of becoming about, if you think about in leadership development, we're giving people the skills. That's a bit like putting the branches out on a tree. It's like, imagine that there's branches, and I'll teach you how to lead a team, and how to negotiate a contract and how to write a strategy. That's equipping leaders sort of horizontally, and we need to do that, and we'll continue to need to do that. And the brilliant work you do at KNOLSKAPE in helping people through all the simulations and all the work you do is getting people equipped to do all of those sorts of things. Absolutely need to be able to do that. But what we're talking about with psychological flexibility is going, okay, I need to build the trunk of the tree. And that's about changing how I am in the world and how I think about the world and how flexible I can be with all of those components of it. So, for example, it means you want leaders who are less kind of stuck with certainty and are able to kind of operate in ambiguity. That's certainly the environment I see
yeah.
organizations and clients facing. Or they're less focused on themselves, and I can go up a level. I can see the system here.
Okay.
Or I can be less reactive to something and I can be a bit more reflective. I can bring people into a situation. So it means I might be able to be more present rather than be overextended. I might be able to stay present when things are kind of really uncomfortable and challenging. when there's uncertainty or things fail or I don't get AI or whatever it is,
Yeah.
or even I can lean into conflict more. I can take some risks because I recognize it might be uncomfortable. I might upset you, Jason, if I lean into conflict with you. And I know that it will at some point deepen and strengthen our relationship and we'll be able to do better things together. Yeah. So lots of different reasons why those two fit really nicely together in that notion of how we develop leaders vertically as well as horizontally.
And just to take that a bit further, so for those that are thinking about this and why this is important, and I love the example that you're using around a tree and the branches are going broader, but actually what this is looking at is the trunk and how do you go deeper in certain areas as part of this. What would you say it's giving leaders by focusing on this and not just the horizontal skills that you mentioned there, for instance, doing a one-to-one, being effective one-to-one or giving feedback? What does it give them in all those things that you described that perhaps maybe they're not focusing on or doing?
Yeah, I think it does it in two ways. So let's take that example of a one-to-one.
Mm,
If we're working horizontally, we teach them the steps. We'd say you need to set the stage, you need to establish an agenda, you need
yeah,
to actively listen, you need to give feedback. Brilliant. But that doesn't mean to say we're going to execute a one-to-one.
yeah,
Because often some internal stuff comes up, our thoughts, our feelings, sensations in our body that derail us. They stop us from having that brilliant conversation, that one-to-one, and giving the feedback and helping our employee to learn and grow and do what we want to. So psychological flexibility is almost like really practical on a day-to-day level. It means I've been taught the horizontal stuff.
yeah,
With the flexibility, I can lean into the uncomfortableness of some of the stuff that I'm being asked to do as a leader, just on
yeah,
a general day-to-day basis. But if we think probably more conceptually, what it does is it's a way to unlock choice. It frees you up to lead in a way that is true to who you are. It allows you to experiment with things. It allows you to be open to a conversation. So I needed a bit of psychological flexibility to say yes to doing a podcast
yeah,
because I'm a little bit, it makes me a bit nervous about it. And I'm thinking, oh, am I really an expert on psychological flexibility? And should I? Yeah, but if I can sit with that uncomfortableness, stay open, I can explore the possibilities. So I could have said to Liz, hey, Liz, you do it.
yeah,
Or I could say, I'll do it. I could say, no, Jason, I won't do it. I've just got more choice in what I do. So I mean, a good example might be, we're all taught it's a really great thing to empower our employees. And we've been taught about empowerment. We know there's, develop a circle of safety, learn how to do vision support challenge as a way to work with them, clarify their role, learn how the rules of delegation, how you should do all of that, listen to a case study about how the military do it, all of those good things. And then you just don't do it, because you're flooded with the anxiety or you don't quite trust them, or what if they do a better job than you do at the board? How terrible would that be? So
yeah,
that psychological flexibility just opens up the choice. Could you just sit with the anxiety of that? Could you stop fighting the thought that they'll mess up at the board or that you'll lose your job or your reputation will be trashed or whatever? So could you open up some possibilities? Could you go with them? That's one choice. Could
mm,
you let them just go for it? Could you coach them a bit and ask them to give you their presentation? It just opens up a whole range of possibilities that at the point you faced it felt like there was only one channel to go down. So
yeah.
yeah, does that give a flavour of the sort of opportunities for people?
It does, and you've also touched on where I was going to go next, which is around if you were to flip that and look at, what does it actually look like in reality when that's not happening, and there is psychological inflexibility, so to speak, with leaders and in those environments. What's the impact of that as well? And I'm sensing from what you described, and please elaborate, Alison. But there's almost this. I got the sense as you were describing it as this element of stagnation and people almost not being able to progress or move forward because there's some prohibitors there, either in our own minds or others, and it doesn't allow, sorry, for that level of innovation or new thinking. Would I be on the right lines, or what would you add to that?
No, you're absolutely on the right lines, and it kind of comes in two ways. So sometimes it's about the things that we don't do. It stops
Mm,
us from opening up choice, but sometimes it's about the things we feel we have to do. So one of the dimensions of psychological flexibility is our sense of who we are. It's one of
mm,
the processes we work with, and maybe talk about that in a minute. So if you've got an inflexible leader, and they could be caught up in a really fixed sense of, I matter only if I'm admired, or if I'm somebody, or if I'm superior to everybody. I'm sure you've come across bosses who who are like that, instead of being able to see themselves as that sort of flexible, transient person.
mm,
Yeah, so that it means then, so for example, if an opportunity comes up, it's almost like they feel they have to take it because they're continuing that fixed view of who they are. So it can sometimes work in both ways. But you might get someone, for example, who's psychologically inflexible around emotion, and they go, oh, do you know what? If I have a high pressure negotiation coming up, I can feel my stomach churning, I can feel my palms sweating, I can feel the kind of slightly, tenseness in my body. And the inflexible leader will do anything to avoid those feelings or sensations.
sure.
So actually, then it means they've got very few options when it comes to that high pressure negotiation that could be really important for their
Yeah.
job. For example, they'll try and placate the person in the negotiation to avoid feeling uncomfortable, or they won't speak truthfully, or there's no boundaries in the negotiation, or they just don't do the negotiation. Yeah. So again, it's about opening up that choice in all of that. And I guess if you're in a team with someone who's inflexible, you might experience it as either very narrow or very chaotic.
Mm. I was just about to say I can't help but be a little bit self-reflective as you're describing that and talking about it. And I wonder, um, are there particular tells, like you've just described there, and behaviors that leaders should watch out for in themselves, and I should watch out for as a leader, be thinking about?
I think because people come with all these beautiful dimensions, it'd be easy to sort of pathologize everything that we do. I
Yeah.
think for me, the biggest watch that we could watch in ourselves, if you were doing it for yourself, Jason, then I'd
Mm,
say, actually, can you notice what's going on inside you? It's a foundational skill that whenever we work with someone, whether we're coaching or whether we're running a program, we're helping them to identify. Can they just notice, oh, I'm, they go, I'm angry. Can you go, oh no, hang on a minute. You're having a feeling that you're angry. And can you notice? Is there a part of you that can notice there's you having the feeling that you're angry? Because when you can do that, you can get a little moment of pause to go, oh, okay, what do I want to do then? Do I want to shout? Do I want to take a breath? Do I want to step out of the situation? Do I want to call time? Do I want to just speak calmly about this? Again, it opens up your choices. Whereas if you can't notice what your mind is saying, what you're experiencing in your body, your emotions, your sensations, you don't have that moment of pause to go, what are my choices here, and how do I want to respond authentically as me, Jason, or Alison, or whoever. So that, for me, that's the first watch is, can you notice that? Because if you can, then it opens up the rest of the kind of the toys in the toy cupboard to play with around flexibility.
and it makes me think of how this really ties into, a lot of conversations that are still happening around emotional intelligence and Daniel Goleman's work on emotional intelligence, and you can see how this all sort of fits together as part of the puzzle piece within that. And again, I was trying to think about senior teams, particularly, because a lot of the culture, the narrative, is shaped by leaders at that level. And what is the organizational cost, for those that are looking on the business to inflexibility? And if we let it run the room, what happens? You touched on about it there with a negotiation example, but what about from an organizational lens where you've seen that have a real impact?
Yeah, and there's some good data. There's a study out this year around all of this with Roche and colleagues. where it's got some good data around, if we put it in sort of, in my language, it would be about you'd be spotting the kind of the overdoing something or underdoing something. But if we look at it in sort of organizational language, we'd be seeing presenteeism.
Okay.
Flexibility builds presenteeism. I have to be here to prove that I am, get all caught up in my thoughts about something. You've mentioned it already. It gives stagnant innovation. I couldn't possibly think outside of the box, or do anything outside of here.
Yeah.
It leads to burnout. So we know psychological flexibility is hugely related to kind of well-being. So that's another one. Also, for people just disengaging from work, just not being here, or leaving organizations because they look for somewhere else to kind of find relief from the challenges of the organization. So they go somewhere else instead of actually realizing, is changing where I am the problem, or actually, do I need to learn how to be more psychologically flexible? Is that possible in this environment? Sometimes it isn't, but sometimes it absolutely is.
Yes. And I imagine there are certain events or things that are happening inside organizations that also cause these moments or triggers to show up, largely than other places. Are you seeing that as well? When there's a big change or something is happening, what tends to be the trigger that you're seeing often shines quite a bright light on where there's inflexibility?
Yeah, I'd say it's anything where it can be uncomfortable, where you're put in a position where the spotlight is on you, so you have to go for a promotion, or there's a reorganization. You're not sure if you're going to have a job, and where do you fit in all of this? It's all of those big sort of corporate shifts. Basically, there's you're transitioning into a new role, and you don't know if the team are going to like you. So anything that makes you uncomfortable is where you spot the inflexibility, because it's a protective mechanism. Basically, we know that.
Got it. In this next part, I really want our listeners to grab their notepads and start putting things down and think about how does this actually work in practice and what they can do about it. And one of the thoughts I had in mind as I was looking into some of your work and the work out there is, what are the dimensions within psychological flexibility? So what are the moves that someone would need to make when they're being flexible, and how do I put that into play so that I can actually action it and do it?
Okay, so not such an easy answer to kind of, but let me walk you through some of the bits. Let's start with the kind of the aspects of it, because flexibility is not one great big thing. There are dimensions of flexibility. And when you're working with that yourself, or you're coaching a team or an individual, you'd be working with each of these bits. So the first one would be emotional flexibility. It's really common for us to go, oh, I can have these emotions, but I can't have these emotions. It's okay to be happy and excited about things, but it's not okay to be angry or disappointed or sad. So that's one of the first things, is going, okay, how could I just learn to make space for all of this? Because it's going to come up in my job, in my life, in my family, and so on. And actually, emotions are really helpful because they tell us what matters to us. So there's always a signal in there that's going, yeah, actually, it's important that I know this. Anger is a brilliant one. If I feel some anger, that's telling me there's probably needs to be some boundaries in place, or potentially I need somewhere where I can be vulnerable. So that's one thing. So how can I develop that emotional flexibility? The second dimension is what I would call, as a psychologist, attentional flexibility, or focus. Yeah. Can I direct and sustain my focus? So can I choose where my focus goes? Because what happens to us quite often is we're so caught up in our heads thinking, what if this happens? And what if this happens? Or last time I did this, this happened. Last time I spoke to Jason, felt really anxious, we get all caught up in our heads. And so we're not present. Our attention is on ourselves. Whereas actually, with attentional flexibility or focus flexibility, we can go, oh, do you know what? For the next hour, I can focus on Jason. I don't need to be in my head worrying whether I've done a good job or not. can just focus on the questions he asked me and doing my best job to answer them. So that's the second dimension. The third is around cognitive flexibilities, our thoughts, what our mind is kind of churning out for us. And it's right, our mind is trying always to make sense of the world. But the flexibility comes from going, oh, can I just notice, have I got some rigid rules about this? So I might have on this podcast a rigid rule that says, I don't know, women can't do podcasts. I don't know, it's a stupid rule, but, that might be a rigid rule I have, in which case, if my mind keeps telling me that thing, I might never come on your podcast, for example. Then there's motivational flexibility. Can I have some flexibility about what I want to pursue? And is it focused on the things that are important to me? So if I think about this podcast again, I'm choosing to be here because I feel quite passionate. In fact, I feel very passionate about psychological flexibility. I've seen the doors it's opened up from hundreds of people that we've worked with are becoming my work as a sports psychologist, how it opens up choice, possibility, fuller, better life. So I'm very motivated. It's important to me to talk to you about this because A, it gets this out a little bit further in the world, and B, it helps me to clarify my thinking, to have the next conversation. Then this flexibility of yourself. Can I make sense of myself, but not stick to some labels? So if I give myself the label, I'm someone no one can understand, I don't communicate clearly, that's going to narrow down my choices. But actually, it's just one thing. Sometimes I communicate clearly, sometimes I don't. If I'm not communicating clearly, you'll tell me and ask me another question. It's okay. So it's that, again, that fluidity of self. And then the last one is, can I have behavioral flexibility? Can I learn in some ways to make some varied choices about how I want to be in the world, not what someone else is telling me, my parents or my partner or society is telling me? Can I actually then have some choices about what I go and do? Because at the end of the day, that's how we all perform in organisations. It's not what we think, it's what we go and do.
And
sorry, it's quite a long answer to that.
No, that was brilliant. And you've outlined like some really key components in the different elements that's important as part of this. And I couldn't help but think, what are the places that you see, working with organizations and leaders within each of those that you described, which is one that typically either falls down or we fall short on, that we should be mindful of?
I guess there isn't an answer to that one, because we're as varied as human beings as there are grains of sand on the sort of beach kind of thing. So each of us comes with if I were to draw like a little map of the sort of things that are happening for you against those processes, yours would look different to mine, to Archie's, to my husband's, to my children's, to, people I work with. We've all got a unique map of how these all fit together. But there's, I would say, going back to what we said earlier, there's always a starting point, which is that ability, like capability to notice. Can I notice if I'm caught up in that sort of doom loop of, I can't upset you? Am I trying to quash my emotions when I feel overwhelmed? Where's my attention focused? What did I just do there? Can I just notice what action I took? Am I doing things that are important to me, or am I getting caught up in someone else's agenda? So if you can notice those 6 processes, that's your starting point for you to go, for me today on this particular challenge, the issue for me. So for me, mine is nearly always my mind. My mind is going, I'm looking at Jason's face. Is he interested? Am I making sense? Oh, he's nodding. Oh, that must be a good. Yeah, my mind's doing all of this while I'm talking to you. Yeah. So often that's my starting point. Can I notice what my mind's thinking? But for other people, it might be, can I just notice a feeling that comes up for me? Or can I just notice the story about who I think I am? So it varies enormously. It's a great question. If there was a magic, again, formula, it would be brilliant, but there isn't.
Sure.
Which is why when we work with it with people, we have to give them different ways into it for them to find their own way of putting their own kind of map together.
But I think it's great because it gives people a starting place to sort of delve a bit deeper as they're thinking about themselves and the way they think and those elements. So I think that's really important and helpful for our listeners to understand what they are and what they look like and how to be mindful of thinking about those as things come up. And I'm going to come back to what you described at the very beginning, which was one of your buzzwords, because I think it's important to raise this. There's still probably a lot of people that are thinking, well, how does this fit alongside this whole idea of psychological safety then versus psychological flexibility? What's the difference? Where does it maybe cross over as part of that? It's something that I think, certainly for me, speaking to learning leaders, dominated for such a long period of time, of this idea of, yeah, we really want a culture of psychological safety. And you kept hearing it. From your perspective, what is interchangeable in each of the terms, and where do they overlap? Where do they, diverge or differ completely?
Okay. For me, they are two distinct things. So if we take Amy Edmondson's kind of definition of psychological safety, she is talking about, I want to create a team where it is safe for that interpersonal risk taking, where I won't be rejected, I won't be embarrassed for speaking up, putting my questions forward, raising my concerns. And so when we're talking about that in organizations, we're often saying, how can we equip leaders to create an environment that makes it safe for colleagues to do that? And that's super important. Managers have a responsibility to be able to do that. But even when we do that, when we step into our work environment, we can still have the uncomfortable thoughts and feelings, and they can still have the power to stop us from taking those lovely actions that psychological safety wants us to do. And if we use this analogy of a disco, actually, which I really like. So imagine psychological safety is a bit like you and your teammates and your manager. You're building the disco, you're putting the dance floor in, you're putting the lights up, you're choosing what color they are, you're having a music system there for people, you're choosing what's the right music, you're making it safe and enjoyable to dance. That's what you're kind of doing. You're creating the environment for it. But the question is, once you've built the dance floor, are people willing to get up and dance? Will they dance? And for most of us, the answer is no. We don't want to be a fool. We don't want to be the only one. We don't want to get it wrong. We don't want to anger other people. We don't want people to judge us, blah, 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 blah. And so psychological flexibility is equipping you to be the first one on the dance floor. Those are the tools and techniques that we have been talking about. I mean, you can choose, if you want to, when it's important to you, to get up and dance. So hopefully that helps see the separation of those two.
Yeah, I really like that. And the example or analogy you've used there is part of the dance floor, and whether people are willing to dance as part of that. And so I'm getting the sense that one is more the environmental conditions, how you set that about and what that looks like. The other is more of the internal capability to then say, okay, all of these things are going on. Now I'm willing to get up and dance and lean in and do that. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So can a leader be psychologically safe or create a psychologically safe environment and still be psychologically inflexible then? Is there a world where that, okay?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess that's what makes, when we do training well, we don't do it, but if people train in psychological safety, that's exactly the challenge. You've created the environment, but you've still got a leader who's inflexible.
And I'm guessing the same is true with the inverse, as you describe that, which is you could be a really flexible leader, but create an environment which is still quite hostile as part of that. Would that be fair? Or?
You could do, although I'd say that's the right way around to have it.
Okay.
Have the psychologically flexible leader, because I think by definition, they're going to create an environment that is mostly psychologically flexible, and they can do it whether the environment is hostile or not, or whether they're correct, So yeah, I think that's the better way round if we want to do that.
Got it. And you can't go through a conversation nowadays without talking about AI and how AI is impacted. We talked about how that's really changing the workplace and the workforce right now in terms of what that looks like. And as you think about how AI is reshaping a lot of that, how does psychological flexibility show up when leaders are engaging with AI in a business context? Because that must come up a lot right now, because that's a big change and stimulus that is happening.
Yeah, no, it's a great question that actually. And if you think about the ways that we often start with helping employees to embrace AI, we either start with sort of the stick approach, which is we're telling you you have to do it, or there's a penalty if you don't adopt it, or there's a directive for you to use it. Or we use the carrot thing. We give you all the reasons why it's going to help the business, and we give you the opportunity to try it, and we give you case studies to show how the business impact is going to work, and we give you training on how to. All I think the carrot things are all brilliant things that we need to do as business to help people engage with and work with and be better skilled at this, because we know from, I think, some government research that was out last year, there are still lots of skill gaps that we need to do in many the UK as a country, but in many other countries as well. But the reason why that's not enough, in my view anyway, is that there are, back to what we've just been talking about, there are internal reasons why we don't upskill ourselves or get involved in it, or if we do, we're so far. I know your colleague Alistair, loves the adoption curve. We're so far down the adoption curve that we're almost like out the back end again of all of that. And that's because a fear comes up for us. We worry that it's going to make our role obsolete, or we're human, we're resistant to change. It's a big change for us to adopt AI in the way that our jobs are changing and will change going forwards. So lots of uncomfortable stuff comes up in all of that, or we just don't trust people, or we don't trust the AI outputs. I'm a bit of one of those. I'm going, not sure, Claude, if I agree with you on that. But anyway, or we lack confidence. We don't think we're the sort of person who can work with technology. We're of a certain age maybe, and that's just not what we do, or we just don't see how it moves us towards the person we want to be and the life we want to kind of lead. And none of those are overcome with logic. I can't logicalize you through all of those. They're back to what we've been talking about. They're experiential. They're part of our human experience. And if we let ourselves we avoid the feelings, or we got caught up in the thoughts and it keeps us again back in that rigid box of what we're prepared to do or not prepared to do.
And I think some of the examples you've shared there, Alison, are really relevant examples that organizations would say they're feeling and how, especially around AI and the adoption of AI tools and implementing AI. It's something we've been working on quite heavily with organizations. If you were to advise HR, L&D leaders in our audience listening right now, who themselves are trying to help integrate AI into, because often it does get lumbered onto that sort of audience to do, how would you advise them in terms of how they develop and think about this? What would your advice be?
Well, I mean, I think it probably no surprise given our conversation, I would be saying, give them some of the capability and psychological flexibility. So, I mean, again, there are a zillion reasons why people kind of don't do AI, given all of their backgrounds. But if you just took, I don't know, let's make one up. Someone said to me, Alison, you have to use AI. One thing, I might feel totally overwhelmed, not knowing where to start. So if you taught me some skills about learning how to make space for my feelings, just to say yes to them, just to breathe around them, just to drop anchor and be present, that might help me go, okay, can I think about this in a different way? Or I might be someone who goes, I am not someone who does AI. I'm a woman of a certain age. I just don't do it. Yeah. Okay. Can you expose me to some examples where I do use it? Like, Alison, do you use Siri? Oh, I do use Siri, actually. Oh, do you use Google Maps? Oh, I do use Google Maps. Okay, well, you're engaging with AI. Let's a little bit of exposure training around, some of my behaviors. Or, maybe I think I'm too old for it, or I'm going to lose my job. Okay, can I help, just to put those thoughts on my lap while I think about, actually, if you train me in AI and this job, is it going to give me a little bit more time to spend with my family, for example? So again, I would build those psychological flexibility skills, because that allows people to use AI in their jobs, but also to engage in any type of training, development, work that we're trying to do as an organization to bring this all together.
It almost sounds like that's the starting point, isn't it? That's the foundational part for anything like building AI readiness or equipping people to adapt, or that's the foundation of it from what you're describing, and it's a good place to start.
Yeah, that certainly would be my recommendation to an HR person, Bill. And then you're equipping them not only to deal with AI, but any other change that comes along. Who knows what's going to come down the track?
Yeah, AI is one thing. As we've seen throughout history, there's always the next thing that comes along, and so it's building. As I liked what you said before, it's building the muscle, isn't it, to take that
Yeah,
forward into any environment and dynamic that's happening.
yeah.
And Alison, as we start to draw towards the end of the podcast, for our listeners, if they were thinking about how do I do something tomorrow, what's the one thing that I could do to start building psychological flexibility, what would you suggest?
So my go-to, and I use it with athletes, teams I work with outside of business, and we use it in business too, it's an approach called drop anchor, and it's about taking that mindful pause, allowing the thoughts and feelings to be there, and then giving yourself space to make a choice. So literally it is, if I were to do it with you right now, I'd say to you, push your feet in the floor. So if we do it together,
Yeah.
push your feet in the floor, feel the floor there holding you up, and just think about the thoughts and feelings you've got right now. I don't know. Thank goodness I've finished the podcast with Alison, or I've got a difficult thing to do later. I don't know. So even with those thoughts and feelings, we can just hold ourselves firm. You can feel the chair holding you up. You can sit up straight. You can take a breath and be back in your body. And then you can notice actually, there's not just you in your body, but actually there's a room here. So if you were to look around your room right now, you could just spot a couple of things. Yeah, I can see my green cup with a cold cup of tea. I can see my pen on my desk. And then you might just hear something. Okay, yeah. Oh, that's interesting. The heating's on. Why is the heating on? It's summer. Okay. I might look out the window and go, okay, there's a world out there. I can see trees and clouds and things. So you can just turn it up and go, okay. So even with that thought and feeling, I can get back in my body and I can just go, okay, there's a world out here. Just brings you back into the present to go, okay, what do I want to do next? This is my simplest go-to tool on developing psychological flexibility.
I love that. Is there something, as we close, is there something that, what's a potential trap that maybe looks like flexibility and someone's doing that, but actually is something very different? It's something else. Is there anything there that you could just advise us on?
Yeah, no, it's a really great question. I don't think I've ever been asked that before. So let's take someone who gets anxious before a presentation, for quite a common thing for lots of people to feel that. So much so that they might actually vomit or be sick. It's really anxiety inducing for them, even though it's an important thing they have to do in their job. And they might play with the tools of psychological flexibility and find one of them, like dropping anchor. Sometimes that makes you feel calmer, but that's not the point of it. Yeah, the point is to bring you back into the present so you can make a choice. But they use it to suppress the feelings. Now I'm calmer, I can do my presentation. And that's the big watch out. It's not about psychological flexibility, is not reducing the emotions or the feelings. It's not about controlling the thoughts or only thinking positive things or thinking I'm amazing at presentations or suddenly I'm all okay about them. Yeah, it's about going, okay, even with the thoughts and feelings, can I still do a presentation? Can I make space for them? Can I just notice them? They're not bigger than me. Yeah, even with the thought that I'm rubbish at this, can I still do it and step forward because it's really important to me to do it? Can I put the thoughts and feelings like on a post-it under my big toe while I have a conversation with Jason? Yeah, can I just, every time I feel the anxiety raising, can I just have a breath? Just notice it's in my body, but it's not all of my body. So yeah, I often have it with athletes. And I say to them, do you know what? This morning, you had to choose what you had for breakfast. And you chose between cornflakes and Rice Krispies or whatever you were eating for your breakfast. I say, did you feel anxious or nervous or sad or angry then? Did your mind beat you up? And they go, no, don't be stupid, Alison. I say, well, yeah, it's because it wasn't important. But when we do important things, we're going to get thoughts and feelings, emotions come up. And that for me is the biggest watch out. Don't try and change them. Don't try and get rid of them, squash them, make them bigger, change them, turn them upside down. Just let them be there. It takes a lot less energy. And that allows you then to have the flexible response that you need to have. So great question. Yeah. Happens time and time again. I wish, when I work one-to-one with an athlete, I can do quite a lot of work before we finally get the penny drop and they go, oh, I've been trying all this time to change that, to only think amazing things about my, marathon race. So yeah.
That makes complete sense. And Alison, thank you. I've genuinely really enjoyed today's conversation. Every time I speak to you, I can't help but go into a self-reflective sort of mode. It almost feels like a coaching conversation for myself as well. So I really appreciate that. And I know our listeners will take a lot away from some of the things that you've described today and walked us through. If they were to want to go a bit deeper and find out more, tell us, how would they find you? Yeah, what would they go to?
Yes. So you mentioned the book, as with my sports psychology kind of hat on. There's a book called Drop the Struggle. You can find it on Amazon and other good bookshops. And that's about applying psychological flexibility in kind of sport domains. But otherwise, in business, the work that we do at Becoming, you can find us on www.becominginternational. Or on LinkedIn if you find us on, or find me. And there are 2 Alison Maitlands, so just check you've got the right one. I'm Dr. Alison Maitland. There's another Alison Maitland who writes in similar space to me.
Okay. Well, we'll make sure we put the links in below. I know the team will make sure we add those to it. But Dr. Alison Maitland, thank you for joining us today on the Learning Curve again. You've been an absolute pleasure. That's it for this episode of the Learning Curve. The work, the worker, and the workplace are all going to keep moving. The question is whether we are flexible enough to move with them. If today's conversation really landed, please do share it with your peers, your leaders who you feel would benefit from today's conversation. And we will see you next time. Thanks so much.
Thanks.